Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
It's really a pleasure to be back with you. It's been over a year, I think, but I've always enjoyed coming here. And until you came and sat on the cushion, I was going to say, we've all gotten a year older because there's nobody sitting on the floor.
I haven't gotten a year older.
You're just ageless. Well, we all are on one level. There's no age, for sure. Well, I wanted to just start out by describing an experience I had many years ago. I was hiking in the Sierras. Maybe some of you enjoy doing that as well. And I was with a group of women. We called ourselves we called this weekend the Women's Wild Weekend. None of us were really very wild, but the wildest thing we did was we rented a cabin, and then we took all the beds outside, so we actually could see the stars, but in a really comfortable bed. That's about as wild as we got. Just so you know, that is a possibility. But at any rate, as some of you may know, if you tend to be like I was always at the back of the hiking line. Do you know how everyone's, and then you're bringing up the rear? And then at some point, those people in the front, they realize, this person isn't here, maybe we should stop and wait. So they do, and then I get to, meet the group, and they're all rested, right? So they're ready to go on, and I have no rest at all at that point, trying to stay with them. At any rate, this one particular day, it was just a gorgeous, gorgeous day. A blue sky, not a cloud in the sky. And the temperature was perfect for hiking. But I decided at one point, I'm just going to take my own rest, even though they were ahead and probably going. So I'm sitting on this rock. And there are some beautiful granite boulders in the Sierras and so forth. Anyway, I'm sitting on this rock, just looking at the sky. And then in the midst of this blue, cloudless sky, there's just this little, I call it an apostrophe. It's just a little apostrophe of white, just like that. And I watched it, and I watched it, and I watched it. And what happened with that is that it turned into a cloud. So it was actually, the vision was this was coming out of nothing. Before there was nothing, there was just blue sky. And then, now of course science would tell us, there was moisture in the air and it was forming a cloud and came from rain originally, But that way of looking at things is so often how spiritual traditions describe awareness and the content of awareness, Be the blue sky of awareness and let all the clouds just pass by, your thoughts, your feelings, and so forth. But there's a subtle separation there, and I want to talk about that a little bit more. But as I'm looking at this cloud form, there was then the experience of the light was just at the right angle, I guess, and it took on all the colors of the rainbow, this cloud. It was quite beautiful. Maybe some of you have seen something similar to that. But this division of awareness and the contents of awareness, many people, particularly in non-dual traditions, are trying to just be the awareness. And people have come to me, students, and say, why can't I just be the awareness? Why can't I rest in awareness? Haven't you heard that? You should just rest back in awareness. Why can't I do that? Well, the one who wants to do that is not awareness. It's the content of awareness. However, it's not separate ever, ever, ever. And so, to be awareness is what you already are, or you wouldn't know you're sitting here. you wouldn't know you're listening to my voice. You wouldn't know what thoughts are going through your mind, or what sensations you have sitting on your chair, or being in this room, or the energy that came or didn't come when we were sitting together. Wish for me, I got to say, there's just a whole lot of love here for you guys, while I was sitting here. I hope some of you felt that. But the thing that often is, and every tradition will point originally to true nature, to God, to Buddha nature, whatever, is the name for this mystery that we can't really name. If you really touch into that dimension of yourself, there's no word. There's just no word. And yet, it will reveal itself. And when it reveals itself, you know that you're not who you thought you were. But there's all this information that we've gathered if we're reading and we're studying and we're meditating and we're following a particular tradition, that somehow all the things that pass through awareness are really kind of unimportant. And so there's a tendency to want to get rid of these very human forms and feelings and karmic threads that we're carrying and so forth. And I believe myself that awakening is an incredible help to begin to deal with some of these very human things that we all deal with. Suffering, for instance, right? There's tremendous suffering in this world, and each one of us has had our own, or maybe many. We all know more and more these days about trauma and generational trauma and how that moves, I would say, in the mind stream. I myself don't use the word karma very much because I think it's so misunderstood as to be a personal thing. And from my perspective, there is no such thing as a personal karma. There is cause and effect, for sure. And you know what it is in your own life. If you're kind and you're loving and you're giving and so forth, you probably will have that reflected back to you, right? And if you're in a crabby mood and you get out of bed on the wrong side of the street and you're walking down the street just, probably not too many people will be smiling back at you. So it's not as though there isn't this individual sense of each of our lives. We're each unique beings. We're each unique expressions of this mystery. And can we honor that as an expression of Buddha nature? Can we not divide ourselves? Because when we are willing and able to realize that there's no experience any of us could have ever had without being aware, without being awake, let's use that word. Every one of you is awake in the sense of being aware. And there's no way you could know an experience without being awake to it. So we want to think it's someplace else, it's someplace very mystical, it's someplace that I'll never get, those kinds of ideas, but it's right here, it's right here. And so there are a lot of different ways that people have tried to make analogies for what I'm talking about. And one of the things that came to me recently, I brought a little mirror here. Okay, there's a Zen story. There's a Zen story about a mother and a daughter who were going up to a monastery to try to get the blessing of the Roshi for the little girl who was about 5 years old. And on the way, they came to the house of a very old woman who lived near the monastery and had been there for years and years. So the mother and the child came, and the mother thought this woman, because she had a connection with the monastery and with the Roshi, that she might be able to help, advance this whole desire to get a blessing from him. But at any rate, so they came and they sat down, and I think they might have had tea or something, as the story goes. But the old woman brought out a mirror. I brought a mirror. And she asked the little girl, 5 or 6 year old little girl, she looked, she had her look at herself, and she says, "What's in the mirror?" And she said, "My face." So then she changed the mirror here, and they said, "What's in the mirror here?" And then, what was your name?
Craig.
Greg. It's Craig, right? You're right. It's the Tonka. It's the marigolds. And so the little girl was able to see in the mirror all the different things. And then she turns it back to the child, and she says, "Now, who's in the mirror?" And she said, "Well, it's my face again." And she said, "Well, where were you? Who were you? What were you when all these other things were being reflected in the mirror?" And she said, "Did you know your name from the very beginning? Was there a time where you could look in this mirror and you wouldn't know that you had a name or who your mother was?" And so forth and so on, these kinds of questions. And of course, for myself, I always kind of liked this image of the mirror, because in order for a glass to become a mirror, it has to be dark on the backside. It has to be black. And I thought, well, that's cool, because what this light of awareness, when you really try to figure out or look into the matter, it's a dark mystery behind it. We're not going to be able to know with our mental intellect what any of that is, frankly. But recently, I was in my bathroom, and I have this two-way mirror. Maybe you guys have a two-way mirror someplace, which has one side is, kind of your regular view, and then the other side is magnified. Okay, this is the one where if you look at it, you have a lot more wrinkles than you thought you did. And so you might prefer one side to the other side. But I thought, this is actually a better example if we're going to look for an analogy, because this awareness, this awakeness that we are, it's not just looking this way. It's looking every direction. It's looking backwards and forwards and left, right, up, down. The wholeness of being is being experienced, seen, seeing itself, actually, seeing itself through this that's awake. And what I put into my little analogy here between the close-up view, which gets to reflect in us those things that maybe we wish weren't here, those very human things, the feelings, the memories, the thoughts, the difficulties, the problems, and if we're willing, able to really look at those things without trying to bypass them. You hear about spiritual bypass. Spirit doesn't bypass anything. It's the mind that's trying to bypass. It's the mind that doesn't want to feel into or be intimate with these feelings or memories or whatever that come up. And so in between that which can look very closely, when you're sitting on your cushion, there are things that will come up, right? And you can say, well, I got to get rid of my thoughts, I have to get rid of my feelings, just let them pass by. And lots of them we can, lots of things. I mean, how many thoughts do you have every day? Probably thousands of thoughts, and only a few, have that grip, whatever it is. But this that's willing, able, this our own awakeness, will look straight into and be very compassionate with. And that's what I think is in between the close-up view and the distant view, is this incredible mystery that's already here of love, of compassion, of the ability to look clearly at whatever is arising, because we can't arrive at what we are, by our mind. But as Dogen said, enlightenment is simply intimacy with all things. So what is it like to be intimate with these aspects of ourselves, I was asked the question earlier, what might be a title for your talk? And I said, well, maybe it could be about waking up and growing up. But growing up, to me, it just means opening to the movement of the psyche to heal itself. And that's not apart from waking up, because these are not two. It's like a coin. And your experience sometime will be with the absolute side of this coin. And you'll be just maybe in those good moments in bliss, or feeling completely free and knowing that dimension of yourself. And then the other side, the relative side, the human side, the pain side. You know, Buddha talked about the two arrows. Do you know that story? There's the arrow that is the original pain. And let's talk about for a minute that probably for most of us came in childhood, and to various extents, right? Some people had tremendous trauma in childhood, some of us less. But still, we know what it is to experience pain because we have a body. We have an expression that's here in this relative world. So that's the first arrow he spoke about. That's kind of unavoidable. Things we had no control over, you know, whatever. But then he spoke about the second arrow. The second arrow is really what causes more suffering. Because the second arrow has to do with how we have interpreted that original pain or that original issue, abuse, whatever. You know, and it's, if you look into it with the clarity of your own internal vision, your own awakeness, you realize that the interpretation was your attempt to understand something, to understand why did this happen, whatever it is in each of our lives. Why did this happen? And there's this attempt, especially if we're kids, you know, to figure it out. Well, it must be about me, right? It must be because I wasn't lovable, or I wasn't strong enough, or I wasn't enough, period. And then we take on an identity, a core belief that becomes this knot, K-N-O-T, you know, this knot that then moves in our lives, the patterns of our mind. So part of meditation practice, from my perspective, is really being able and willing to look honestly into the patterns of your own mind. We all have them. We all have them. And if you kind of make a graph of what are common ones, they many times just come back to I'm not enough. And then you fill in the blank. I'm not whatever I was saying before. I'm not strong enough. I'm not lovable enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not pretty enough or handsome enough or whatever. It's enough, you know. But what's underneath that, you know? So when we're looking from the awake perspective of our own being at these things, we're invited to, it's like an onion, you know, you keep taking layers and looking, okay, what's underneath this one? What's underneath this one? Can we do that? You know, okay, there's this outer shell, you know, our persona or whatever, okay. But maybe the thing that you're looking at is pain, you know, pain. Okay, if you're really soft and gentle with yourself, what's right underneath that? Do you know, well, frequently there's sadness, there's vulnerability. We might have started with rage. Rage is a really good defense, don't you know? I mean, it really keeps us from needing to feel our vulnerability and fear, okay? So there are these layers, you know? And you can either think about it like an onion that you're going inside, or you can think about, you know, just coming down through the layers of feeling and thought and belief and so forth. But there'll always be something underneath. And that's one of the things that being more and more in touch with your awakeness, with your awareness, awareness can go anywhere. It has no barriers. And the great thing about your awareness, it's not threatened by anything, you know? The mind, the emotion, can feel very threatened at times. But awareness, it can't, you know? It's like the mirror in a sense, except the mirror image idea so often omits the compassion piece. This is loving awareness when it comes through the heart. You know, yes, it's the transcendent is not personal, just like karma is not personal, but cause and effect actually, of course, are moving. The mind stream is moving all the time. In whatever ways, and we bring into this incarnation whatever we bring in. And sometimes that's where pain is coming from, and we don't even know it for a long time. We think it's all about, you know, this thing or what happened. I thought my parents were really loving, but now I'm feeling all this crap, and what, you know, we try to understand. But they're just these innocent misunderstandings because we've inserted a separate self into the whole idea. Okay. And that separate self idea is actually something that keeps us from really being able to heal those wounds with our own compassionate awareness. So we wake up to that, hopefully. I know some of you in this room have definitely had that experience of waking up, you know, and then we talk about waking down, you know, waking up and out, and then waking down and in, you know, and these are definite, I don't even want to say stages, movements, you know, and sometimes the movement of the heart will be, you know, kind of first, and then, you know, up and out into the transcendent dimension of the mystery will come later. But eventually, we can't just hang out up here. It's called, in Buddhist thought, you know, like a disease, hanging out in emptiness. You know, it's pretty safe up there. And many people are trying to transcend these incarnated aspects of the divine in order to just be up here all the time. But eventually, I will tell you, something pulls us by the ankles back down into the body. And that's a really important piece of the so-called spiritual journey, I believe. You know, just like, okay, now, what is it like to come from that place of loving, compassionate awareness in these human forms, in this particular life dream, because it's all a dream in one respect or another. And I wanted to read something that you're very familiar with, probably, if you've done Buddhist studies for a while, but aspects of the Genjo Koan by Dogen. As all things are Buddha Dharma, there is delusion and realization, practice and birth and death, and there are Buddhas and sentient beings. As the myriad things are without an abiding self, when all things have no separate self, no solid self, as the myriad things are without an abiding self, there is no delusion, no realization. We could say no satori, no Buddhas, no sentient beings, no birth and death, no beginnings and no endings. See, that's the transcendent view, isn't it? Up here, out and up, out and out, whatever. None of that's here. Doesn't need to be here. Those are all ideas about how life might be moving in the so-called spiritual journey. However, if we keep going, the Buddha way is basically leaping clear of the many and the one. Thus, there are birth and death, delusion and realization, sentient beings and Buddhas. Yet in attachment, blossoms fall, and in aversion, weeds spread. So, you know, even from an enlightened perspective, you may have a preference that the blossoms will keep going, that these will always stay in their beautiful whatever, but they will fall, and in terms of delusion, the weeds of delusion, and the delusion is basically about the separateness. That's the suffering. It's a dream of separation from what we are, separation from ourselves, separation from each other, and separation from the moment. And this is where we come back to the human side of things. The human being is not a separate being, but there's this human expression that we all have. And it's really beautiful when you begin to feel into the uniqueness of each thing, not just human expressions, tree expressions, flower expressions, fish, animals, energies, vibrational energies that you'll feel, as your day goes on and so forth. So here's another translation of that very last thing about attachment and aversion. The way of the Buddha inherently soars above such extravagance and austerity, uniting beginnings and endings, uniting delusion and satori, uniting sentient beings and Buddhas. It is falling blossoms uniting love and sorrow. I really like that translation, that line. It is falling blossoms uniting love and sorrow, spreading weeds uniting indifference and dislike, nothing more. And then there's another line, those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. You don't think about that, do you? The Buddhas have great realization of delusion, whereas those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. In other words, those people that are identified as sentient beings don't know that they are an expression of enlightenment already. And the Buddhas know their own delusion. They know the dream. They know what's continuing. They may know, and maybe many of us may know on some level, the lifetimes that we've spent in various ways with various themes and so forth. And sometimes that doesn't come clear, but sometimes it does. And it's amazing just to see the intricacy of how this that is operational, we could say, this that is creating itself and moving itself and awakening itself is actually doing so for two big reasons, it feels like, or ways it seems to make sense, is to see itself. To see itself. How could this see itself if it weren't for you and me, if it weren't for the creation of universes upon universes? It's seeing itself. But it's not a me seeing itself. It gets to, the tree gets to see itself through us. Okay, that would be another way of saying it. Because there's another line in the Genjo Koan that says, to carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. So it's sort of like, one of my favorite trees is a ginkgo tree. You guys know a ginkgo tree? They're turning yellow. They're so beautiful in the fall time. And that leaf, the ginkgo leaf, it has a split in it. And I always think of this, what we're talking about as that. There's a single stem, and yet that leaf divides itself into, to see itself. And that's what we've all done. We have the same, we're expressions of the same ground. The stem is the same, and the expressions are unique, incredibly unique. All of them. Some of them are painful, some of them are not. That second arrow I was talking about, when you get to see that you've made an identity out of such an innocent misunderstanding when we're kids. that somehow it was us, you know. And then you hook onto a personal karma idea. Oh, well, this must have happened because I was terrible in my last life or something. And you don't see the unity and the wholeness of your being, of our being, of being itself. Do you know? Being itself. Now there's how are we doing? I'll put one more thing out there and then I want to see what's happened to you with you guys as I've been chattering away here. But do you remember Baizhang's fox? Do you remember that story about Baizhang was it's a Chinese Chan Zen sort of story. But anyway, the Roshi of this monastery was giving Zen talks whenever he did, and there would be this kind of old man just standing in the back of the room, never saying anything, kind of looking a little bit strange. And one time, the Roshi, everyone else had left, and the Roshi goes to this man who's still there. And he said, well, who are you? And he said, well, actually, I'm not a human being. I'm a fox. And so a fox, you know, he said, well, how did that happen? He said, well, I was once the Roshi of this monastery. And somebody asked me the question, do enlightened persons have karma or something like that? Are they subject to karma, enlightened person? You know, right there is, from my perspective, that's the first thing to look at. There are no enlightened persons. It's not a person who's enlightened. Enlightenment reveals itself within experience that we'll call a person. But the person themselves, you know, it's awakeness that awakens itself. That's the experience here. And that's the experience of my teacher, Adyashanti, as well. You know, we talk about enlightened persons. But anyway, to get back to the fox, okay? That was a little detour. So he said, so I said, when someone asked me the question, do enlightened persons, you know, have karma? I said, no. And then I had 500 lifetimes as a fox. 500 lifetimes as a fox. And of course, because I had said that was his idea, you know, that this is the reason he had these 500 lifetimes as a fox. And then he begs the current Roshi, who has the same name, by the way. So, you know, these 500 lifetimes could be a lot of fox trickster kinds of lifetimes. But at any rate, as the story goes, he said, please tell me, give me a turning phrase that will release me from these lifetimes as a fox. He said, so how would you answer that question? Does an enlightened person, you know, are they subject to causation? That was another way of putting it. And the current Roshi says, that one is not blind to causation. It's like a subtle shift, isn't it? It's like people often, if there's been an awakening, they think they're done. I thought that for a long time, which was so naive. You know, it was so naive. But nonetheless, you know, then I met Adyashanti, who said, you know, awakening to the absolute's just halfway around the circle. That's kind of like step one to, how does it want to move? How does it want to operate in this human expression of ours? But at any rate, I won't go on with the fox story so much except to say the guy was the fox guy was greatly enlightened. Don't you like those little, just like there's just a moment and then, and sometimes it's really like that. But anyway, he said, but, you know, I'm going to have to leave the corpse, the fox corpse in back of the monastery. Would you be willing to give it the burial that you would give to a monk? So that's what happened, and you can read that story if you're interested. There's more about it, how the other monks were like, nobody around here has been sick. How come we're doing this monk funeral back in the back? But at any rate, I only bring that story up because I think there's such a misunderstanding around karma. I really, really do. That somehow we don't see that too is an expression of how life is moving in order to move ourselves, our souls, our psyche, our expression of the one, to move it toward enlightenment, toward awakening, do you know? And sometimes there's no way to really experience the depth of joy and the depth of love if there hasn't been suffering. It's not a requirement, but as you know, life is full of suffering. I mean, that was the Buddhist first truth, right? And so there's a way that we can look at these things we'd like to get rid of in ourselves, you know, as really opportunities to look more deeply, to look with clarity, to look from what's awake, from what's compassionate, not to judge. Because our awareness has no judgment at all. None. Zip. It just sees clearly. It sees clearly what is. You know, every moment it sees clearly what is. The mind has lots of judgments, doesn't it? Our conditioned mind. Oh, shouldn't have done that, shouldn't feel this, shouldn't, you know, on and on and on. But awareness doesn't really have that judgment, but it does see clearly. And when it's seeing itself through these human expressions, there's compassion and love and caring and gentleness and softness. And can we begin to look at our stuff, the stuff we'd like not to be here, can we begin to look at it, you know, with the eyes of compassionate awareness, you know, the heart of awareness. It's not just this mirror image. It's itself. It's seeing itself. And it apparently loves to be because it's being everything. So, you know, oh, now I can be the expression called anger. Oh, now I can be this expression called fear. Now I can be this moment of bliss. Now I can be this expression of joy or humor or laughter or, you know, or tears or whatever. It's always expressing out of itself the moment as it is. And most minds don't really want to be in the moment as it is. I want a different moment. I don't want this one. No, let me have this other one. And so I'm going to sit and try to be that other one, you know, and sometimes we can get great insight. I think the greatest psychotherapy I ever had was on the cushion, frankly. You know, some of you may have that experience too, that you just find out all kinds of things on your sitting. It doesn't have to be on a cushion, obviously, because here we are. But you know, the willingness to look into what's arising from that perspective of what's clearly seeing it within compassion. And the other thing I would just mention, kind of to, before we just open it up to see what you all want to talk about, is how every one of us has a unique pathway, so-called, to awakening and to coming into more an individuated sense of ourself in terms of the psychological piece, the human piece. You know, it's unique to each person. There's not just one way. And so, you know, maybe you're following what you think is a Buddhist path, or you're following a Christian path, or a Sufi path, or Muslim path, or whatever. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with these traditions, but we can get stuck often and think it needs to look a certain way because we've heard stories about how it is for this person or that person or the Buddha himself or Jesus or whomever. But at any rate, here's just a short poem that I'll end with before we talk to each other. It's by Antonio Machado. He says, "Traveler, there is no path. The path is made by walking. Traveler, the path is your tracks and nothing more. Traveler, there is no path. The path is made by walking. By walking, you make a path, and turning, you look back at a way you will never tread again. Traveler, there is no road, only wakes in the sea. So the sea that I would sense in that poem is the sea of awareness, the ocean. You know, we've all heard of that. Are you just the bubbles on the top, or are you the whole ocean of awareness, the depth of it, where it's very still at the bottom? It's very still, and yet everything arises from it. All the waves, whether they're crashing or whether they're calm or whatever, it's all the same stuff. And when you realize that, you know, you have a different relationship with others, quote unquote, apparent others. You have a different relationship with your own life. So anyway, I've spewed out a whole lot of different stuff here, and I realize that it may not have hung together the way one would hope, but I would love to hear from any of you if you have questions or comments. Yeah.
Thank you, Dorothy. I'm intrigued by what you said, that awareness has no judgment.
Yeah.
And relating to karma, so I have a friend who has become a Buddhist monk, and he's off in all these faraway places, and, you know, at the right hand of the toku or whatever. And
Right.
doing all these ceremonies and living his whole life to work off his negative karma.
Yes.
And
The 500 lifetimes as a fox.
yeah, right? And so karma is often interpreted or taught or understood as cause and effect, and there's good effects and bad effects, and there's
True,
good karma.
true as far as it goes. Yeah, go ahead.
Good karma and bad karma.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you compare that with awareness has no judgment, it's like, okay, is one effect positive or negative? It's, I guess in some ways it's all in the viewing,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So what would you,
It's
yeah,
all
'cause that's sort
in
of,
the viewing.
karma is a form of duality, right?
Sure.
But awareness
Sure.
with no judgment is non-dual.
Exactly. Put them together and see what happens. Let duality be seen. You see, duality is not the problem. We have duality in order to love, basically. I mean, Nisargadatta says that's the purpose of duality. It really is to love. But the thing about karma eventually, and this is why I prefer to think of it as the mind stream. Yeah, karma, cause and effect, yes, that happens. And as the Roshi in the Bhajan story said, you know, we're not blind to that, because even after awakening, lots of stuff will come up, you know, even authentic awakenings, and some of you may know what that's like. Do you know, it's like, oh, but I thought I was done with all that. I had 20 years of therapy about my mother, and here she is again, even though I have awakened to my true nature, you know. It's like, but that's where we're invited to come deeper and deeper and deeper, to see that from the perspective of everything and everyone and every moment, there was this mistaken identity of being separate from that. There was this innocent misunderstanding, and we've all had those innocent misunderstandings, you know, from however life has moved itself. What came to me recently about, you know, this response to your question, or our own exploration about it, you know, both Ramana Maharshi and Thich Nhat Hanh both said there is no reincarnation. And because there's been memory of past life dreams, as I would call them, many, you know, over eons, I was contemplating about no reincarnation, but, you know, and what came to me just yesterday, actually, in the shower. That is my ashram every morning. You know, it kind of tells me what I need to look at, or a song will come and I'll be interested in it. But anyway, just yesterday morning, this came, and, you know, who knows if it's true? I mean, we're just exploring things. But it's like there is no reincarnation because there is no separate soul. There's only incarnation. However, incarnation, here you have the relative and the absolute, and they meet in the now. But we think of the now in terms of time. This is eternity. It's the eternal now. And so in this incarnation, that which sees clearly, sees itself, has knowledge of past, present, and future, so-called incarnations, that are purposeful in this one. So, the things that come up, are for our own growth in this incarnation. And so, your friend, this is his pathless path, like, apparently, right? Like, oh, okay, but I think it was Deepak Chopra who said, he said, all suffering is recycled trauma. And the memory of it will create anger. The blaming of it will create hostility. When there's somebody to blame, hostility, revenge, so forth. The blaming yourself will end up with guilt and shame. The feeling completely what would be the word? Like drained of energy will end up as depression. Do you know? So there are all these ways that we deal with suffering from the perspective of being separate from the felt sense. So when you're willing to be at one with the felt sense, and as many of us will know, that's not an easy thing to do, and sometimes we need help, to face into, or to be even willing to touch our toes into whatever pain is being carried in the body. And that's why this comes back into the body. Do you know? Now, what is here? What is here that wants to be liberated? Because it's about freedom, right? It's about freedom. I don't know if that addresses your question, but a little bit.
So basically, only an unenlightened individual would have this sense of karma and suffering through it, because it's it's very
well, not necessarily, because enlightenment would be that which shows you, like in the Genjo Koan, Buddhists have great realization about delusion. So the Buddha knows true nature, is true nature, knows that it is that, right?
Yeah, okay.
However, it also sees the dream. And it lives in the dream, We live in the dream of separation without being separate. And that's why, being able and willing to be intimate, like Dogen said, enlightenment is simply intimacy with all things. It doesn't mean just trees and flowers. It's also intimate with what's coming up here. Yeah, right? And so often we're trying to practice ourselves out of the very thing that could liberate more and more of our being, into the present moment. Oh gosh, we're running later, but yeah, go ahead.
When you mentioned that poem by Antonio Machado, which is my favorite poem ever.
Oh,
in
fantastic.
The original Spanish, Caminante no hay camino, solo estelas en la mar.
Oh,
Se hace camino al andar. And
thank you.
you put it into context for me. It's wonderful.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it in the original language. It's beautiful in the original language. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the pathless path. It's kind of it liberates us from believing that it has to look a certain way. It looks how it looks. It looks like your friend, doing all the whatevers, which can be beautiful. There's beauty in the traditional ways of honoring and devotion. The devotional path is beautiful, and hopefully, whether you come from the who am I question, which is more a question of the knowledge path, or you come from, devotion to Buddha or devotion to God or devotion to whatever truth, they end up in the same place, which is surrender. The surrender of will, because you realize you've been lived this whole time. You've been lived by the very thing you've been seeking. You've been lived by yourself, capital S. I guess our time is up, my friend, so thank you guys for your attention, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much.